I'm joined today by Antonio Garcia Martinez, who's been an advisor to Twitter, head of ads targeting at Facebook. He's also author of the New York Times bestseller Chaos Monkeys, Obscene Fortune and Random Failure in Silicon Valley, which I finished reading a couple of weeks ago. Super interesting book, Antonio. I mean, I think to kind of set up your experience, as the book starts, you're working on Wall Street before you eventually enter the tech world. What was sort of the initial catalyst for moving from the former to the latter?
Well, the credit crisis, right? I mean, all of Wall Street was blowing up, right? I had a front row seat at Goldman to see that happen. And well, I'd been sort of involved in the tech scene a little bit. I went to school at Berkeley, so I had seen the first tech bubble kind of grow and to popping, in 2001 or so. So I kind of knew that world existed. I didn't really know about it, but I knew enough about it to understand that, in the future financial apocalypse that we're all going to face, it would somehow survive. And I think I was for the most part right, at least so far. So that's how it happened. And it turns out there's actually a lot of similarities between Wall Street and some aspects of technology, more than you might think.
Yeah, I mean, in the book, you certainly are critical of some or a lot of what you witnessed on Wall Street. You've also written critiques into the book about what you saw at Facebook and in your work in the startup world, et cetera. How much, or if at all, was aside from the sort of circumstances of the credit crisis and leaving Wall Street, how much of it was just not wanting to be in that world for moral and ethical reasons, if at all?
Oh, there's no ethics to it. I mean, I think it was more just Wall Street as a construct. It's funny. I assume your viewers are probably familiar with Freakonomics, right? And the original book by Stephen Levitt or whatever, in which he cites how why is it that so many Chicago drug dealers are poor, or why do people go into the drug trade, right, if they don't actually have a very good life? And it turns out the attrition rate is huge. One third of them die, et cetera. And so there's actually an interesting sort of parallel between Chicago drug gangs and Wall Street, in the sense that initially positions actually are not that well paid. The more junior roles are actually not particularly well paid, at least for the cost of living in New York. And everyone's kind of running through this kind of dangerous high stress thing in the hopes of getting made, so to speak, or becoming a partner, right? The only real out from Wall Street is, particularly in the case of Goldman, is making partner. And so, yeah, I just wasn't willing to sign up for this sort of, everyone run towards the machine gun nest or whatever, and one of you will survive, and that's the only hope. And in the meantime, you're going to hate life, which is more or less what Wall Street was. But I mean, it really didn't have anything to do with I have to say, with the moral, the ethics of Wall Street.
What would keep you from going back to that world now?
Well, they wouldn't hire me. I don't know. It seems horribly dull. I don't know. I still have some friends who are in that world, and I just don't understand how they spend so long inside of it. I mean, I think Wall Street serves a function and a role. I'm not anti-Wall Street. I think it actually serves a critical function in the economy, and I'm glad that I worked there. Right? I mean, Mark Twain has this famous quote: "A classic is a book that you like to have read, but you don't want to read." Right? And so, I think working at Goldman Sachs is something that I like to have. I like the fact that I did it. I'm not a big fan of doing it again, to be honest.
In the second part of our interview, I want to dig more into the specifics of the ad world and your work at Facebook working on ads. But before we get into that, I'd love to ask you about your insights in terms of, I think there's a perception from many people that big corporations are sort of inherently bad, and there's other people that for political reasons see big corporations as inherently good, or sort of like the drivers of growth, employment, and innovation and everything that is good in a capitalist society. Can you talk about whether that's even a legitimate sort of dichotomy to discuss, or whether really we're talking about organizations that are made up of people, and how sort of circumstances put people in positions where they end up making decisions they might never even really think they'd have to make until they're really in the middle of it in some of the situations you describe?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think one of the great fallacies of human thinking is false dualities, right? Of either us or them, or this is inherently good and that's always inherently evil. Big corporations, I'm somewhat skeptical of sort of modern tooth and nail capitalism. I don't, and I guess corporations are in some sense are the handmaidens of that. But corporations can take various forms, and then corporations can be evil sometimes and good other times. I don't know. it's hard in Silicon Valley because a lot of what our corporations, even corporations that are worth quite a bit, I mean, Facebook now is worth something like $500 billion. When I was there, which wasn't that long ago, it still felt relatively small, actually. And, I wouldn't say chaotic necessarily, but often very improvisational, right?
Well, I
And so,
guess I
I guess,
mean more. I might have not even asked the question in as clear of a way, but imagine, for example, a controversial decision that a company makes about, selling people's data to advertisers, for example, or something like that, and immediately there are sort of general assessments made of that's a really bad company that did that. And then when you break it down, really it's sort of like the culmination of a lot of little decisions, many of which you describe in the book Chaos Monkeys, little decisions that build on top of each other, motives that build over time until you really have mostly what I would consider good people, but this inevitability of making the bigger picture decision that's often framed as a bad one. It's not a defense of corporations, but I'd be interested in hearing from you how those dynamics develop inside of a company.
yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know how much you're citing that data thing as just a particular example, or you specifically want to get into that.
No, no, it's just a random one, something that might be controversial as portrayed in corporate media, for example.
Yeah, but corporate media is kind of stupid, right? I mean, I think
Sure, yeah.
yeah, most tech journalism is terrible and is written not. I think that there definitely is good tech journalism, obviously, right? And I think the best tech journalism is sort of a very informed popularization for aimed partially at both at insiders and also at outsiders to understand that world. I think the bulk of sort of mainstream tech coverage is either gee whiz, look at this cool gadget in the most superficial way, or I think what you just described, which is a very popular narrative around Facebook, which is probably why you're citing it, which is, oh, look at this evil thing that they're selling our data. I mean, the funny thing is, it's not even true. I mean, Facebook doesn't sell your data. Anyone who claims Facebook sells your data doesn't understand how Facebook makes money. And so that's kind of, and again, I'm the first one to say, and I criticize Facebook in many ways in the book. Part of the reason why I wrote the book is that I just, Facebook is one of those things people should definitely question and think about and wonder. But I kind of wanted them to ask the right questions in many ways. And I think often in the case of Facebook, and I assume more broadly, although I'm not really an expert about those other companies, they're often not discussing the right things, or they're not worried about the right things, frankly. And again, I think of it as just because so many of these fields are so technical or so new, it's really difficult to understand how they work. I mean, I myself, before I went to Facebook, wouldn't have understood how a 2 billion user company actually monetizes itself. And so, again, I'm empathetic with those views in a sense, but I'm empathetic, but I would hope to engage with them and kind of remedy them, to be honest.
I'd be curious to get your assessment as someone who has worked at some of the more well-known tech companies, but you also built and participated in the sale acquisition of smaller companies. How much of the success of some of these tech companies is due to just the idea is extraordinarily good compared to, I guess, what I would put under the umbrella of chance? And under chance, I would include where it is that you happen to start the company and how that connects to the people that you meet, the timing of when it is that you decide to start creating or executing this idea, other items that you would put under the umbrella of chance. Do you have a sense of how that split might work out in the real world?
Yeah, I mean, well, the idea itself is worth nothing. I mean, if you doubt that, then go and try to sell one and see what they give you for it, right? I mean, ideas themselves are worth almost nothing in Silicon Valley. What's worth something and why, relatively small companies, well, small companies, embryonic companies that don't really exist yet, get funded or get sold, or in the case of mine, getting sold 10 months after it was founded, is because two things. One, either the team, which is always very important in Silicon Valley, or execution, right? It's very rare for an idea in and of itself to be worth almost anything. But just to kind of maybe slightly morph your question, I think what you're maybe asking is how much is value accrues to happenstance, right? Being in the
Yeah.
right place at the right time versus, actual willful action on the part of the team, whether that's due to their talent or the execution or the seed idea or whatever, right? That's a good question. I think, neither is really neither is really sufficient, and both are necessary. And so I think it takes both. I mean, a lot of people have this conversation in Silicon Valley sort of behind closed doors because everyone wants to believe that it's a strict meritocracy. But anyone that's been in it long enough realizes that, of course, it isn't. And everyone in Silicon Valley has, met the guy who built a wonderful product, who's an amazing engineer, and yet for X, Y, and Z reasons never quite managed to monetize it or have a big exit. And then we've all met that guy who was an early employee at Facebook, who basically won the job lottery, mediocre engineer, no big deal, almost got fired there when he was there, whatever, and then walked away with $50 million when he was 25 or something. Right? we've all seen those stories. And so, I don't know, putting a number on it, half and half, who knows? I mean, I think both are necessary. That's the reality of it. You do need the luck and the happenstance, and you also need the talent, I think, most of the time, unless somebody wins the lottery, which also happens. But yeah, I mean, certainly I think there's a lot more luck in it. Put it this way, seen from the outside world, right? The average mainstream observer of Silicon Valley, there's more luck involved than they think, put it that way.
We've been speaking with Antonio Garcia Martinez. He's author of Chaos Monkeys, Obscene Fortune, and Random Failure in Silicon Valley. We'll take a quick break and continue with him next. I'm continuing my conversation with Antonio Garcia Martinez, who's been an advisor to Twitter, head of ads targeting at Facebook, also author of the New York Times bestseller Chaos Monkeys, Obscene Fortune, and Random Failure in Silicon Valley. I'd love to talk a little bit about the work you did in ads targeting at Facebook, and ideally make this as interesting as possible for people who may have a sense of the degree to which ads are being targeted to them on Facebook and elsewhere on the internet, but might not really understand sort of the underpinnings of it. So let's start there. What was like the big revolution in ads targeting that you were a part of when you were working at Facebook?
Well, the realization that Facebook doesn't have much data. That's for one. So we spent a year trying to, everyone thinks that Facebook has all this amazing data. The reality is, well, there's a lot of fallacies we could attack here in terms of how the mainstream world thinks about Facebook. But, one of the big discoveries was that when I joined, remember the first day I joined, I fired up the revenue dashboards, and I saw that Facebook's monetization on a per ad basis was incredibly low, which I didn't quite understand at the time, although I later grew to understand it. At the time, Facebook was making money because a billion times any number is still a big number, right? And Facebook was just getting so big. Even if the ads themselves weren't worth much, there's enough of them that, at least initially, it would still make, $1 billion or $2 a year. But if things were going to, really take off and there was going to be an IPO and, what investors expected, it would have to do a lot better than that, right? And so, yeah, the quick realization was that Facebook doesn't actually have data that's actually valuable to advertisers by and large. I mean, there is some that they do have. Geography, age and gender to a certain extent are important. Other pieces of data that most people don't realize, like Facebook knows who you are on every machine that you touch because Facebook is so addictive. And that turns out to be very important when it comes to targeting and attribution of ads. So there is some data that Facebook has. There's a big realization that Facebook would really have to open itself to the outside world of targeting if it was really going to make, lots of money and actually, in some sense, service the most sophisticated advertisers. I think that was a realization that hit the company around 2012, which is when they started shipping all these sorts of new ads targeting products, many of which got plenty of coverage in the 2016 election because they were used extensively then.
So when you visit, for example, a company that makes espresso machines, you visit their website, and then you're on Instagram and an ad for that espresso machine comes up, and you're on Facebook on your computer and an ad for that espresso machine comes up, a lot of times people believe that's because Facebook has all of my data. But the way you explain in the book that works, if I understand correctly, and if I don't, then I'll be embarrassed, is that it's actually the espresso machine company that has the data, and they are able to use Facebook to match that data in a sort of mathematical way, not with you as an individual named Antonio Garcia Martinez or David Pakman or whoever, to target ads to you on the Facebook platforms. Is that more or less the way that it works?
Sort of. I mean, it is an exact match. It's not probabilistic. They're not using like machine learning to make the match. I mean, so basically, yes. I mean, what was built in 2012 was effectively a join from what was until then a fairly closed ecosystem of Facebook to the entire outside world of data that's known about you as, a consumer in this capitalist society, right? How that happens, there's various technical ways that it happens that are probably not worth getting into here. But the key idea to understand here is that one of the fallacies in thinking about how Facebook makes money is that Facebook sells your data, right? You mentioned this meme earlier that people like reporting on. That's not true at all, actually. Facebook, for starters, doesn't sell your data. It doesn't actually let your data leave the Facebook ecosystem at all, right? It would be suicidal for it to do so. And so it actually designs products such that Facebook just does not leak data in any real way. Secondly, Facebook doesn't actually sell your data. It actually sort of buys your data. And what I mean by buys your data, it doesn't actually pay money for it, but it builds tools and services and products such that advertisers are willing to either share their data or effectively share their data by expressing that data on Facebook. So getting back to your example about, I forget what product you named, but you're shopping for whatever, shoes, some electronic product, whatever. Amazon or Zappos or just to name random companies, will have effectively joined that record that goes through your browser and your cookie record with the Facebook user ID, which is your unique ID on Facebook, and that's how they show you that ad based on that browsing behavior. So Facebook had to build a product, which I helped create, called Custom Audiences, that basically joins that outside set of data with the Facebook user ID and allows that advertiser to actually show you an ad within seconds of you having been on their page. Whether Facebook actually, how much data Facebook actually gets from that is kind of a longer question. It doesn't get everything. I mean, these companies themselves, by the way, don't necessarily trust Facebook and are very jealous of their own data. And so they want to share as little as possible with Facebook. They literally just want to share as much such that can Facebook figure out who you are, and that's it. They don't want to share anything beyond that. But without going into too much detail, that's the reality of how it is. Facebook has to build products so that advertisers are willing to effectively share the fact that you went and shopped for a product on their website so that Facebook can show you an ad.
So one of the most popular stated upsides of this system is that you are going to get ads that are relevant to your interests. You will have fewer irrelevant ads appear. You won't, as a man, for example, get ads for a product that is used almost exclusively by women, just like as one example, right? One of the general concerns we hear about these systems are general privacy concerns. But can you talk a little bit about what some of the non-privacy sort of possible dark sides of such a system are, if you believe there are any?
Well, the dark side is the system doesn't work and you see crappy ads, right? I mean, look, here's the reality. In the ads world, there's only two types of ads as seen from the point of view of the user. They're either crappy and they're terrible and they're general. And back when I was a targeting PM, people would always complain, oh, Facebook ads are so terrible because it's some iPad scam or it's some product I'm not related. And it's like, well, okay, great. So now we joined your user experience to the entire outside world of data. And now you're looking at the thing that we know that you want, that you shopped for literally 30 seconds ago. And what's the problem then? Oh, suddenly they're creepy. So all ads from the point of view user are either crappy or creepy, and there's nothing in between, right? I think the reality is that users are just not willing to reconcile themselves with the realities that a consumer internet product that depends on network effects like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever will necessarily depend on ads as a business model. There have been no other exceptions to that. There's no other company that manages to be viable and produce a lot of the consumer internet without ads as part of its business model.
Well, I guess a concern could be, and I'm speaking hypothetically, and you might hear me say this and say, yeah, David, that's just not possible based on how the system works. I guess a potential concern would be, well, you would be able to triangulate data such that you are using people's browsing preferences for products to identify ways in which they might be unfairly manipulated by propaganda news into supporting some political thing that's against their own interests or something like that. I mean, I don't know. Is that even remotely possible?
Well, I don't know that they'd use your browsing history, but the technology of joining outside data about you that presumably has been legally acquired, right? There's an entire secondary market in data in the U.S.
Yeah.
And then using this technology to project that on Facebook, yeah, that was used during the election. I mean, Trump used custom audiences like crazy in 2016. If you want to assign a moral value to that because you don't like Trump or whatever, then I guess you can. But again, I think there's just different conceptions of privacy. In Europe, privacy is seen as a regulatable legislative thing that underemployed European bureaucrats constantly go on about. In the US, it's seen more of a consumer choice issue, and there actually isn't that much national regulation. You may or may not like that, but that's what it is in the US, right? And so it's seen as a consumer choice issue where the attitude is basically, well, if you don't like Facebook in some sense targeting you, then don't use Facebook, right? That's kind of the attitude in the US. It's weird because I'm critical of Facebook in other regards, but in this regard, a lot of the criticism of advertising just seem really unrealistic to me, particularly because there's no alternatives to it. How else is the internet going to get paid for, right? That's the reality of it. The user expectation has been set that things like Facebook, which are very expensive to actually generate and produce, even though most users I think don't realize it, how is that going to actually get paid for?
It's not going to be membership fees, right? We know that.
No. Yeah. You can go into all sorts of reasons why it's never going to be membership fees, right? But it's never going to be membership fees. And it's funny. There's all these rumors like, oh, Facebook's going to charge you for Facebook. That's the last thing they would ever do is for Facebook. So yeah, no. This is the reality of it. And I also, and again, I'm going to sound like a total kind of asshole about it by saying this, but I find it hard to sympathize with people who feel so paranoid about the fact that someone tracked them to sell them a sweater, right? I mean, given, if this was like, if this was government monitoring like the NSA, or we were in some sort of politically unstable state and it was government monitoring, I can sort of see that. But where it's literally a commercial product, I mean, look, here's the reality of it, and it's totally unfiltered, and no one's going to like it, and they're going to howl, but it's completely true. No one actually cares about privacy. I mean, a few privacy advocates that have made their careers about it care about it, but I can guarantee you, everyone who cares about privacy, I give them a 20% coupon off at the Gap, and they would literally sex me nude photos of themselves. Like they don't care. No one actually cares about privacy in the deep way that like they're not going to use Facebook because of it. I mean, no, I mean that's clearly empirically not the case. Facebook has what 2.3 billion users and growing. So I don't know. I think it's the whole privacy story. I can see it gets clicks. People are kind of engaged with it. I think every tech journalist is like legally required to write one Facebook privacy story a year, or they lose their journalism license or whatever. But I think it's kind of a pointless story. I mean,
journalism license. There's one that we've heard from the current president, right? That's an idea.
Right. I mean, I think there's lots of questions and a lot of objections one can raise about Facebook. I don't mean to say, oh, Facebook is perfect. Just go along with your business. Don't ask questions about it.
Yeah.
But complaining that things like retargeting, that they've improved your ads by showing you ads for products you actually want to buy, is some sort of massive negative. I mean, sorry, no, it isn't. You were complaining about the crappiness of the ads, 3 years ago, right? Like you can never please some users. I mean, if you want to ask me, like, what are the things that people should be worried about a little bit? I mean, sure, in the context of the Russia ad hacking thing, the fact that Russians were able to buy political ads, strictly speaking, that's actually not legal. So political ads actually are regulated in the U.S. in a way that regular ads are not. And I think Facebook does need to change there a little bit in terms of how it does business, and I think those complaints are really justified, because when it comes to politics and democracy, that's just more important than selling you a pair of shoes, and I can totally see that, right? And so I can rattle off 6 different things that people should be asking questions, Facebook questions about, but I just don't think the ads targeting is one of those things personally.
The book is super interesting. It's Chaos Monkeys, Obscene Fortune, and Random Failure in Silicon Valley. I finished it up a couple of weeks ago. We've been speaking with the book's author, Antonio Garcia Martinez. Thanks so much for talking to me about this.
Sure. Thanks for having me.